Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Captivating Cases in Rabbinic Responsa, our 6-week journey around the world throughout time, listening in on the surprising practical questions your ancestors asked rabbis across Jewish history. So where are we? Today we are doing lesson 4, which is called Counterweights Considered, and we are going to be talking about the push and pull within halachic decisions. Today's lesson is generously co-sponsored by Marilyn Kirshen. The second half of the sponsorship is available. If you'd like to do that, please reach out and let me know. So, where are we? Over the past few weeks, we've been exploring this genre of Jewish literature called Shut. Shut is an acronym, stands for Shalot Utshuvot, questions and answers. And in lesson 1, indeed, we focused on the questions. We spoke about what the questions say about the Jews who asked them, what they say about us, and our commitment to the Torah, and our incessant search for what the Torah and how God wants us to act in every situation, no matter how dire the circumstances were. In lesson 2, we started to unpack how a rabbi would go about answering the question. We started off by the scuba diving rabbi, shall we? Right? The rabbi who has to figure out the facts on the ground, whether that's you're consulting with hydrologists to see what's making the Nile rise, or whether that's consulting with veterinarian scientists to figure out whether a chicken can live without a heart or not, and whether it's thousands of other situations like these throughout history that rabbis have had to figure out what the facts on the ground are before they begin to answer the question. Last week we said, okay, so now that they have the facts on the ground, they actually understand the case, how do they answer the question? And we said the first thing they're going to do is look for precedent. Where in the Talmud, where in the Torah, where in the Mishnah, where in the Medrash am I basing my answer on? Where in the huge corpus of Jewish literature am I going to draw on in order to answer the case at hand? And we saw last week how that might be it might be a very far stretch. As long as the logic follows, that's fine. For example, you might be looking at who's responsible for maintaining a drainage issue in a river, and then you might be applying those laws from the directive from the Talmud, lift it from the Talmud, and apply it to blood libels and whether you can or cannot tax the entire region in order to pay for one city's court case in order to exonerate the Jews from this terrible decree. But in other words, what we spoke about last week was starting with precedent. Precedent in practice. Figure out what you're going to apply it, and obviously clarify how you are applying it. And now we're going to talk about what we are going to call the counterweights. Counterweights essentially are larger picture Jewish values, and we're going to talk about almost 20 of them today. Obviously, we're only going to zone in and focus on 2 or 3 of them because those are the ones we'll fully unpack, but we'll introduce about 20 of them in order to give us an idea of these larger Jewish values that sometimes when you're trying to apply precedent in a certain way, you're trying to answer the question in a certain way, something else will come up, which is a larger Jewish value that's at play here in this case, that you might be like, hold on, we can't just apply the law, we have to figure out based on this larger Jewish value. Along the way, we're going to learn about something called a heter. Raise your hand if you've heard of a heter before. Okay. A heter is what today, perhaps derogatorily, I'm not sure if it's a derogatory term or not, people call loopholes. All right, that means where you'll come to a rabbi for a heter, for an allowance in a particular situation, and along the way today we're going to be learning about how rabbis can give such allowances, how they can give a disposition. In other words, many people like to look at Jewish law. I often say that Judaism is one of the most, people don't believe me, but it's one of the most liberal religions out there. And the reason I say that is because of this, is because often a rabbi can give an allowance or a loophole to accommodate a particular situation, especially if there's a larger Jewish value at play here. The question is why and how can you do that? In other words, at least the impression of Judaism that's out there is that Judaism is black and white. Either it's allowed or it's not allowed. Either you're allowed to do this on Shabbos or you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. What does it mean? You're not allowed to do this on Shabbos, but if XYZ, then you're allowed to. Right? So we're going to learn about that. By the way, just to get you thinking this way, the most obvious one, obviously, is what's called pikuach nefesh. And we're not really going to talk much about that today, but it is one of the counterweights. Pikuach nefesh means to preserve a life. In other words, there's this larger value, which is to save a human life, and in that instance, almost the entire Shabbos, or maybe perhaps the entire Shabbos, gets pushed off to the side in the face of this larger Jewish value. We're going to learn about other values that might not be as broad-reaching, but sometimes also things are played around with in order to accommodate these other values. We're going to try to figure out why. And again, that's a bonus we're going to get along the way as we learn about these counterweights. All right, so that's our work cut out for us today, yes? All right, how are we going to do this? So as usual, we are going to have a few case studies. The first case study we are going to do is going to be called the KRAKOW couple. We are going to go to the 1500s. a 14th century dispute between, sorry, a 16th century case that will reveal the social and economic realities surrounding marriage in that era. We will then jump to the 18th century, the 1700s, when the Alter Rebbe is just introducing Chabad Hasidism, right after the Baal Shem have introduced Hasidism, and there are some liturgical disturbances. There are arguments over what the proper liturgy is for the prayers. And this case, in turn, will pull us into two earlier controversies about two particular topics. One is the parental-child relationship, particularly over marriage, whether a parent can put restrictions on who a child marries, etc. And then a 16th century debate about how Jews that were expelled from their countries should navigate age-old traditions, not mitzvot, but minhagim, or customs, in their new communities. All right? Now, along the way, we will learn a lot about the halachic process, as always, but I think we are ready to get started. Yes? So, put on your time machine hats, whatever it is, and let's go to Krakow in the 1500s. We are in the Beis Medrash. We are in the study hall of a man by the name of Rabbi Moshe Isserlish, or Rabbi Moshe Isseruls is the original name. Why? Because his name was Moshe. His father's name was Isser. Isser is the Yiddish equivalent of Yisrael. And he was a rabbi in Krakow. He's most commonly known by, remember, rabbis always have acronym nicknames, so he's most commonly known as the Ramah, or Rabbi Moshe Isseruls. That's what it stands for. The Ramah, Reish Mem Aleph, and the Ramah is most famous for the fact that he is the one who allowed the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe I'm saying this in a strange way, but still, he's the one who caused that the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish code of law, became so universally accepted. Let me explain what I mean by that. Rabbi Yosef Cairo in the 1400s wrote the Shulchan Aruch. No. Rabbi Yosef Cairo was mid 1500s. He writes the Shulchan Aruch. Right? No, that's not the Rambam. The Rambam lives in the 1200s. Rabbi Yosef Cairo writes the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish code of law. You are correct that the Rambam is the first one, Maimonides is the first one to codify Jewish law. But this is much later when it gets codified in the way we know it today, the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish code of law. And Rabbi Yosef Cairo writes it. Rabbi Yosef Cairo is a Sephardi. And therefore, not necessarily would his work have been popularized and been well accepted in all areas of the Jewish world, if not for the fact that the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isseruls, made what he calls Hagaos HaRamah. The glosses, I think is the correct English term, the glosses of the Ramah. In other words, anytime the Ashkenazi custom differs from the Sephardi custom, he writes that in his glosses to the Shulchan Aruch, and as a result, that allowed the Shulchan Aruch to now become universally accepted by everyone, and till today, the Shulchan Aruch is what anybody, Ashkenazi or Sephardi, Israeli or American or Ethiopian or whatever it is, would go to in order to figure out how to go about Jewish law. And we're going to see actually that this story, which is a live story that unfolds in front of Rabbi Moshe Isseruls, we're going to see that this story actually affects the way he writes the law. Okay? Let's get the background. I want to alert you to the fact that this case features some things that are going to rub against your 21st century senses. And I will clarify that and give you the historical context for that after we read the case. So, Steve, if you can get us started with text 1, we're on page 154.
Okay. A man here who had fallen into financial ruin.
Wait. Where are we? What page?
We are in the Hebrew on page 154, but I think the English starts on page... Yeah.
The English is on 154. A man here who had fallen into financial ruin arranged a proper match for his grown daughter. During their long engagement, the father passed away. Without her father or mother, the daughter remained alone. Her relatives acted as strangers and did not support her except for her mother's brother, who took her into his home. No closer relative helped her. As her wedding day approached and preparations for the wedding meal and ceremony needed to be made, the dowry that was promised to the groom was nowhere in sight, and other wedding-related expenses were left unaddressed. A neighbor reassured her that the dowry would be provided and advised her to prepare for the wedding and go to the mikvah. She followed this advice, and on Friday, the wedding day, they veiled her, as is customary. As the afternoon progressed and Shabbat approached, the relatives clenched their fists and didn't contribute adequately toward the dowry. Approximately a third of the total was missing, At this point, the groom retreated, refusing to proceed with the ceremony. He paid no heed to the community leaders' pleas not to shame a Jewish girl due to financial concerns. The murmurings about him didn't bother him, nor did the rabbi's reprimand have any effect. In this way, the disagreement and dispute continued until finally, 90 minutes into the night, when it was already Shabbat, they reached an agreement and the groom was willing to go to the chuppah.
Okay, Rabbi Moshe Yisrael's like many rabbis before him, is about to preside over a marriage. Lots of questions to answer, lots of historical context to give. Let's start with the fact that they made a wedding on a Friday. Today, I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find a wedding on a Friday. Why did they make weddings on Friday? So first of all, let me just clarify, this is a very well-established fact. As you go through Shut, as you go through lots of different questions, Rabbinic Responsa, you see lots of weddings happening on Friday, and that is clearly not the custom anymore. Almost no weddings happen on Friday today because of the obvious reason of Shabbat, like especially what's going on here. You're going to see that it's going to get very complicated with Shabbat. Why were weddings on Friday in those days? Most likely it was for two reasons, one of which I think is actually clearly stated in some places, another one is more speculation. The one that's clearly stated is that most likely the financial, we have some literature that points to this effect, that the financial situation of Jews in those times, which was pretty rough, pretty dire, let's call it, would have made that if you anyways were serving a nice meal for Shabbat, why not kill two birds with one stone, if you will, and serve another big meal, especially for many guests during the week, would have been very expensive. So if you can put them both together into one meal on Friday evening, in other words, they would have the wedding itself on Friday afternoon, and then the meal, the celebration was that evening, and that would be the same meal for Shabbat and for the wedding. I should note, by the way, that they didn't have all sorts of other things like we have today to discourage them from making a wedding feast on Friday night. And can anybody think of things that we wouldn't do at a wedding feast on a Friday night? No live music.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
No photography. And what's a wedding if it wasn't captured on photography these days, right? No videography. No cell phones.
Depends on what time of year when sunset is. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, but assuming that you're going to use the Shabbat dinner meal as that, today we wouldn't do that. We'd be like, no, I want pictures of my wedding. I want live music of my wedding. I want people to be able to carry to and from the wedding. Today, that's a much more complicated thing. In those days, it was a much more simple affair. So that's why it wasn't such a big deal. It was most likely in a house, the wedding. It wasn't like in a big hall, whenever, all the things we know of today. All the Mishagas we know of today. Now, another... Hello? What happened? Hello?
You're freezing,
You're frozen.
Yeah, but I came back, right?
So wise that you paused.
I was so wise.
I have an important...
Even the technology couldn't keep up with me. Okay, here we go.
I have an important question. Whatever happened to dowries?
Whoa, we're getting to the dowries in just a second. Before I get there, another reason why weddings might have been on a Friday, and this is just speculation, is everything in those days revolved around work. I mean, today also a lot of things revolve around work. Think of the reason that weddings are on Sundays today. Right now, you're soon going to see that they don't want to make weddings on Sundays because that's like when the Christians make weddings. It's a religious thing, whatever. They don't want to do that. But Friday is still a very practical day because most likely if you had a person with a job, which was very common in those days, that involved traveling, and they were gone from their family all week, very common in those days, not common today. Some people, fine. But traveling all week, Friday, Shabbos, they were home. So this was a perfect opportunity. If you wanted people to attend the wedding, there was most likely another reason. Again, this is just speculation, but for whatever reason, their weddings were on Friday, despite the fact that it could lead to complications, as we'll soon see, which eventually leads to not a ban, but a shift in custom of not making weddings on Fridays. Okay, let's talk to the specifics of the story, shall we? Let's unpack it. Steve wants to jump right away to the dowry. I have a few other questions first. A girl is left orphaned after her engagement. So already this is a unique situation. The father was going to marry her off. Right? So he would have been responsible for the dowry. We're getting there, Steve, in a second, why the dowry is such a big issue here, right? But for now, she's left orphaned, okay? Why do we think that not many relatives are taking her in and she's being ignored by other relatives? Anybody?
Well, there could be a couple of reasons.
Okay.
First of all, they didn't like the father, so it's like a grudge from generational grudge. The other thing is they're not doing so well themselves.
Exactly.
So.
I think much more likely it was a very practical question. Like, they're like, we're barely struggling to support our family. You want us to take on this new burden, and this new burden involves already a dowry that was promised to a certain amount that we can't What would the father have done? I don't know, taken out a loan, worked extra hard, whatever. But they now have their own responsibilities. In addition to that, most likely that's what was going on. Okay, so the pledged dowry now does not exist. Okay, whoever the relatives are that are supposedly going to help in some way or another are refusing to help. Okay, now the groom was promised a dowry of a certain amount. We need to talk a little bit now about the fact that the dowry is playing such a huge role here, because I think a lot of you, as we get to the story and like the groom is refusing to marry, you're wondering, so why on earth would this girl want to marry him? Like, if it's all about the money and he's refusing to marry her because the money's not there, so then let her say, okay, marry the money, don't marry me, right? That's what happened today. I think that's a very privileged position for us to think from, a very spoiled American, Western, 21st century position to think from. I'll explain why. Is everybody here familiar, I think you are, with Maslow's pyramid of needs, hierarchy of needs? If you're not, you can Google it. I can link it in the Ask Lesson email. It's basically a pyramid of needs in which he makes the case that a person spends all of their time, effort, energy, money, everything on achieving their most basic needs. It's like a pyramid. Once they have those needs, then they can go on to worrying about other needs. And once they have those needs met, they can go on to worry about other needs. But you have to climb the pyramid. And unless you have the bottom one, you're not really worried about the second one. Why do I say this? I say this because on the bottom of the pyramid is food, shelter, safety. You know what I mean? Like, that's the bottom. I think even safety is like a little higher up, he puts it. And then eventually you get to like meaningful relationships and romance and stuff like that, but that's a little further up. And eventually you get to things like self-transcendence and meaning and purpose in life, which is all the way at the top of the pyramid. But like I guess my point is, you talk to this couple, their main goal number one for this marriage is to survive. To survive, not to thrive, not to have a wonderful romantic relationship, but they have a meaningful relationship. That would be nice as a secondary point. But point number one is to survive. So a lot of this was a financial issue. In fact, we could probably say that the biggest support that the groom can do of the bride is to not marry her until he can actually provide for her. Remember, we're talking about a time when Jews were really in dire straits financially. So he needs the dowry in order to be able to get his life off on the right foot for him and for her. And she also wants that dowry to be done properly. Now, they end up in this strange scenario. Why? Because she doesn't have proper counsel. There's neighbors that are that are pressuring her, and they say, go to the mikveh, don't worry. Yeah, put on the veil. They used to put on the veil in the morning, and then she would be veiled all day till she was brought to the chuppah. Anyways, they're telling her, go, do it. The money, it'll work itself out. I know. And you see how the Ramah is explaining it. He says the relatives clenched their fists. Like, this became a very high pressure situation. The bride prepared. Eventually, the groom is like, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this. I'm not going forward with this, and you cannot force me to. A person cannot be coerced into marriage against their will. I will not be entering this marital union unless the dowry is spoken for. Now, back and forth. By the way, he was right. He got his way in the end, you see. Eventually, they come to an agreement. The problem is that they got to the agreement 90 minutes after Shabbat has already come. Okay, what is the problem with this? I've been intimating this. I've been hinting at this all lesson so far, that there might be an issue with getting married on Shabbat. What exactly is the issue with getting married on Shabbat? So let's first see the law in Maimonides itself. Okay, Maimonides is, as Steve pointed out earlier, one of the first codifiers of Jewish law. Tova Jane, if you can read for us, please, text 2, Shabbat safeguards. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Let me go back. I'm always going ahead.
We're on page 157.
All right. I'll try to be a good girl. It's hard.
You are a good girl.
Thank you. Cases are not judged on Shabbat, and Kiddushin, betrothal, is not performed. These rabbinic decrees ensure we don't come to right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so basically, the Mishnah is sorry, not the Mishnah. The Maimonides is listing things that are rabbinically prohibited from being done on Shabbat. Why? Because we may come to right. Both of these are things that eventually may come to right. So therefore they're prohibited because eventually you may come to right. Whatever it is, maybe you have to make some adjustments to the ketubah. I mean, even though betrothal itself doesn't require, right, you put a ring on her finger and you say, Hareyat Mekudeshetli, you hand her the ketubah. These things don't necessitate writing, but because, together with that, there might be some I don't know, maybe you have to write down some archives, or maybe the ketubah needs some adjusting, all these different things. So because of those things, we're prohibiting, excuse me.
Ah, hello, owner.
Yes, I'm changing his name right now. Welcome, Ron. Okay.
Hello.
So because of these issues, we are prohibited from engaging in officiating a marriage after Shabbat has come in. Okay.
Rabbi, question.
Yes, go ahead.
A ketubah has to be in writing.
Ketubah has to be in writing, but the ketubah would usually be written beforehand. Most likely, this ketubah was already written early in the morning. Till he hands her the ketubah, nothing happened.
No, I know, but if they were going to change the ketubah, it had to
exactly.
be
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Changes to the ketubah, maybe.
So it had to be. It had to be in writing.
Yes.
You can have an oral contract.
Correct. Yeah. No. In this case, the ketubah has to be written. It cannot be oral.
It has to be written. Okay.
Some contracts can be oral. It's not ideal, but it can happen. It's not with a ketubah. Now, the thing is, though, Tovah, where you're correct is, that it may come to writing. It's not guaranteed. It's not like in order to marry you need to write, but because it may come to writing, therefore the sages said you're not allowed to. Okay. So the question on the table is: should this wedding be held on Shabbat? Right? In other words, it's 90 minutes of the Shabbat already. We didn't plan to get here, but here we are. Right? So he goes ahead and and the Ramah officiates at the wedding, and hence we get our story. Okay, now. What I'd like to do with you now, over the next 25 minutes, is explain to you why the Ramah officiated at the wedding. And I'm going to do so from the Ramah's words, but because the Ramah's words take some background, I'm going to take you all the way to the background. In other words, I'm going to do what the Ramah did with you. So we're going to take you all the way back to the precedent, which is what we learned last week must be done. So just like the Ramah goes to the precedent, we're going to go to the precedent. We're going to go to the Talmud, and it's not going to be a far stretch. This issue is basically going to be discussed in the Talmud, and we're going to see how he applies that law to today. But we already know the law is you're not allowed to have a wedding on Shabbat. So the real question we're going to look for is, how did he provide what's called a heter, a loophole, an allowance in this situation to officiate at this wedding? And it's going to turn out that the reason he does that is because there's this massive counterweight, which is going to be to therefore allow it. But along the way, what we're going to learn is that there's only certain setups. You have to have certain things in place in order to be able to use an allowance like that, a counterweight like that, in order to be able to bend the rule this way. In other words, what we're arguing is he's not bending the law; he's recognizing halachic counterweights. I'll explain. We already discussed in earlier lessons a few times the importance of a rabbi not looking at his job as just to give good advice. This isn't an emotional, intuitive discussion. He's being asked for one thing and one thing only. As a rabbi, as a wise scholar, as somebody well-versed in the Torah, give me the Torah's opinion as to what should be done here. Right? That's going to become crucial. Why? Because when you're going to start to go against what the halacha is, we need to ask, what rules are you following? You can't just be floating that out. Oh, I feel so bad for the bride. No, that can't be the answer. There's got to be a system as to how you got to where you're allowed to officiate at this wedding. Okay, so in order to do this, as I said, the first place we need to go is back to the Talmud. All right, let's go back to figure out the origin for this ban of betrothals on Shabbat. Ron, if you can read for us, please. I know you just arrived, but still. Text 3a and then 3b. All right, let's start with 3a, a ruling.
What page?
We are on page 157. You got it?
On the bottom.
Yes, I did.
Perfect.
These are the quasi-mitzvot that the sages forbade on Shabbat. We don't adjudicate, and we don't betroth.
Okay, so the Mishnah in Masechta Beitza, in Tractate Beitza, which discusses a lot of things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, and you're not allowed to do on the holidays. In Tractate Beitza, there is a list. For whatever reason, the Mishnah has to list the things that are mitzvot that you're allowed to do on Shabbat, things that are mitzvot that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, all different things like this. And then again, because mitzvah, obviously, if something's a mitzvah, we want to allow somebody to do it on Shabbat, but some of them are going to be allowed, some of them are not going to be allowed. And then it gets into the category of quasi-mitzvot. Okay? Quasi-mitzvot are the same two that we saw Maimonides quoting, din Torahs, in other words, court cases, and betrothal. Now, key factor here, the betrothal, in other words, marrying someone, is being called here a quasi-mitzvah. And this is something the Talmud immediately pushes back on. Ron, keep going, text 3b. The Talmud asks a question.
We don't betroth, but isn't this a full-fledged mitzvah?
Says the Talmud, why are you calling betrothal a quasi-mitzvah? I thought marriage is a full-fledged mitzvah. Who says this is a quasi-mitzvah? And then keep going, text 3c is the answer.
Who? Me?
Oh,
No,
The
Ron, you're still
Right.
going, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
The Mishnah is discussing a case where he is already married and had children.
Okay. This is the answer. The answer is, oh, no, it's a quasi-mitzvah in this instance. Why? Because you're talking about somebody who was already married already. He had boys and girls. So therefore, the second marriage is a quasi-mitzvah. It's not a full-fledged mitzvah. Usually, the mitzvah of getting married, for the most part, is understood by most commentary as being in order to have children. It's not the same mitzvah. It's two separate mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah to get married and a mitzvah to have children, but they're kind of interlinked. And because this man has already been married, has already had children, in theory, he doesn't have an obligation to get married and to have children. So therefore, it's a quasi-mitzvah. It's still a mitzvah when he gets married, but it's not the same. Okay, that's the answer of the Talmud. Now, this is where we're going to pause and we're going to slow things down. You ready? Because there are different commentary that explain this question and answer in two different ways. Let me explain to you what I mean. Now, if you'd like to follow along with me now, you can either follow on the screen or you can follow on page 158 in exercise 4.1. We are going to be presenting two opinions as to what exactly just happened here. There was a list of quasi-mitzvot. Marriage was in it. Then the Talmud asked the question, why is it a quasi-mitzvah? I thought it's a full mitzvah. And the Talmud answers, the Talmud answers, no, it's only a quasi-mitzvah because he already married and had children. Yes? We can all repeat that. Yes? Perfect. But there's two ways of looking at that question and answer. The first one is the simple one. The first one is that it's just a question of classification. This is Rashi's opinion. Rashi explains the question of the Talmud as follows. I'm so curious. I'm adding these words for clarification, right? Rashi explains the Talmud as follows. I'm so curious, why would you classify, not that this is any relevance to the law, but why would you classify marriage as a quasi-mitzvah? And the answer is, because he's already married and had children, therefore it's only a quasi-mitzvah. But here's a very different way of looking at that question. And this is option 2 on page 158, which is a substantive way of looking at the question. This comes to us from one of Rashi's grandsons, a man by the name of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam, or he's known as Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam was one of Rashi's grandsons, and as often is the case, the grandchildren are equally as brilliant as the grandparents, but perhaps have a very different way of thinking about things. And Rabbeinu Tam, as he often does, by the way, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam often argue. Rabbeinu Tam is quoted in what's known as Tosfot. It's the other side of the page on the Talmud. For those that study Talmud, the center of the page is the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Gemara. And then on the inner part of the page will be Rashi. And on the outer part of the page will be Tosfot. And Tosfot is a collection of people. And together, and among them are a few of Rashi's grandchildren, one of which is Rabbeinu Tam. So this particular disagreement that we're going to talk about, how to look at this piece of Talmud, comes from Rashi versus his grandson Rabbeinu Tam. Right? Okay. Rabbeinu Tam looks at the question very, very differently. What does he say? By the way, the most famous argument between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, anybody know what it is? Especially the men? You've seen this every morning at the minyan here? Has anybody ever noticed that some of the rabbis and some of the congregants put on 2 pairs of tefillin?
Yes.
They are called Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Inside the tefillin, there is a difference in the order of the parshiot, and that is a disagreement between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam that continues till today. The halacha follows Rashi, meaning the ruling follows Rashi, and we follow Rashi. But Rabbeinu Tam is like a stringency that some people will also put on a second pair and just say Shema in it, which is what I do every day after davening, and others as well, just in order to fulfill the obligation, also according to him. So again, that's just these 2 people, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, these 2 rabbis. All right. What does Rabbeinu Tam say? Rabbeinu Tam says, what are you talking about curiosity? The Gemara is not curious. This isn't just a technical question about classification. Is marriage a quasi-mitzvah or a full-fledged mitzvah? And then we learn that really it's a full-fledged mitzvah, but in this case it's different because it's a second marriage, and he already has children, so therefore it's only a quasi-mitzvah. No. He says this is a very substantive question. Why? He says, you're saying betrothal is not a full-fledged mitzvah? Hold on a second. I want to know how this relates to the risk of writing, right, versus this mitzvah. In other words, like this. If the Torah tells you, a biblical mitzvah, that you have an obligation to get married, the rabbis cannot come and say, well, we're worried you might come to writing. Again, remember, it's just a concern. It's not an actual issue. It's just a concern that you might come to it. And they're allowed to make those concerns. They're allowed to make those edicts about concerns like that. And they do it all the time. But they cannot do it about a biblical mitzvah. So that's the way Rabbeinu Tam translates this question. He says, betrothal, as far as I know, in other words, he's speaking for the Gemara now, right? The way he understands the Gemara is pushing back and saying, so far as I know, betrothal and marriage is a full-fledged mitzvah. And if that's the case, the risk of writing doesn't seem to be enough of a reason to ban it on Shabbat. And this is where the answer becomes so relevant. What is the Gemara answer? The Mishnah is discussing a case where the man was already married and had children. So if your question was a simple curiosity question about classification, which is the way Rashi looks at it, so then the answer is also a simple answer of classification. In this case, the betrothal is only a quasi-mitzvah. Why? Because he's already married and has children. But according to Rabbeinu Tam, this changes the whole halacha. Why? Because according to Rashi, nothing changed. Weddings are prohibited on Shabbat because you may come to write. That's why they're prohibited.
That's terrible.
And the Gemara went back and forth, right, about a technical issue, which is betrothal a full-fledged mitzvah or not? It was just a technical conversation about a classification. According to Rabbeinu Tam, he says this is going to have relevance on the thing. Why? He says, listen, the question was, why isn't marriage, which is a full-fledged mitzvah, why isn't that strong enough to resist a ban by the rabbis about the concern of writing? The answer now, that you're telling me that this Mishnah is talking about a case where a person was already married and had children, right? So essentially the way the answer goes is, this remarriage is not important enough to risk writing on Shabbat. What's going to be the crucial difference between the way the Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam describe it? Boom, bada, boom. If you say that this Mishnah is talking about a quasi-mitzvah because it's somebody who was already married and had children, and therefore that's not important enough to push off Shabbat, to resist a ban of writing on Shabbat, then that would mean a man's first wedding is strong enough to resist a ban of writing on Shabbat. And therefore a man's first wedding would be permitted on Shabbat. So this is where we get now. If you'd like, we're on page 160, where you can see the result of the two ways to understand the discussion, or whatever, a summary of the two ways of understanding the conversation. Steve, I'm not going to take questions right now. We really need to finish this point. We're smack in the middle. We're tight. Let's get it together, and then afterwards I'll take some questions. So on page 160, we have the two ways of understanding the conversation. The result is that it's a machloket. There is a disagreement between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam whether a first marriage would be allowed to on Shabbat or would not be allowed on Shabbat. Now, what is the halacha? What is the law follow? Anybody? We already saw in Maimonides. What does the law follow? Are you allowed to do a first wedding on Shabbat or not?
No.
The answer is no.
Yes.
No, that's just no. You're not allowed to do a first wedding on Shabbat. That was the halacha. Maimonides told us that already. First wedding, second wedding, it doesn't make any difference. You're not allowed to do a wedding on Shabbat. Why? We're concerned you might come to write. Beautiful. But here's where counterweights come into play. Why is the halacha follow Rashi? Because over time, the majority opinion revolved around Rashi, solidified around Rashi. That you shouldn't be allowed to do a wedding on Shabbat because you might come to write on Shabbat. But there is a minority opinion, Rabbeinu Tam, we can even label him, we know who it is, Rabbeinu Tam, who holds that yes, a wedding is not allowed on Shabbat, but that only applies to second weddings. It doesn't apply to first weddings. Again, this is not the halacha. This is not the halacha. Right? But it's going to become very, very important right now. Okay? Here, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I guess I'm going to introduce you now to two terms. Okay? There is something called me'ikar hadin, and there is something called halacha l'maisa. Okay? Halacha l'maisa means what we're used to. You open up a Shulchan Aruch, you see what the halacha is. Halacha means the way. L'maisa for action. What is the way that we're supposed to be acting according to action? But there's another term, which is me'ikar hadin. Me'ikar hadin means as per the core of the law. And if you go back to the core of the law, which is what Ramah just did for us, we went all the way back and we see it's actually a disagreement between Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi. And it's a disagreement about whether this ban of writing can actually stop people from getting married on Shabbat or not. And Rabbeinu Tam is not of that opinion. Now, he's a minority opinion, which means, therefore, he does not become the halacha l'maisa. He does not become the main law that we follow. But this becomes so relevant to us because what if something is going to push us in the direction of the minority opinion? And that something is going to be a counterweight. What is the counterweight here? It's called kavod habrios, or human dignity and marital harmony. Okay. Tova Jane, if I can ask you to read all of this for us in text 4 from the Ramah. Let me explain what happened. The way this story ended is like this. The Ramah officiated at the wedding 90 minutes after Shabbat had already entered. But the Twitterverse, or the blogosphere, and the local newspapers, and the schmoozing by the mikveh, when people have nothing better to talk about, started to get louder and louder and louder. There was an uproar in the town. Did you hear what Rabbi Moshe Isserlish did? He officiated at a wedding on Shabbat. We don't perform weddings on Shabbat. Everybody knows that. The halacha is, and most people are not familiar with the whole history of the halacha. They just know what the law is. You don't make weddings on Shabbat. What's going on here? And the murmuring got louder and louder and louder until it reached the desk of Rabbi Moshe Isserlish. And here we have, text 4, his shuvah, his responsa that he penned in order to defend his position. Go ahead. Tova Jane, when you're ready.
So it's on 162, right?
Yes, indeed. The rabbi's rationale.
I'm proud to have it said in my name that in a case like this, the wedding is permitted on Shabbat. It was a time of great need. Having already immersed herself in the mikveh for her wedding, the bride would have been humiliated if she had to wait for her chuppah until after Shabbat. Additionally, it was unheard of to keep the veil on through Shabbat and to hold a wedding on Sunday, when non-Jews customarily marry in observance of their holy day. In such pressing circumstances, Rabbeinu Tam is worthy of being relied on, especially considering that his interpretation of the Talmudic passage is superior. There cannot be circumstances more extenuating than this: a mature, often bride facing the humiliation of being treated differently. She would have felt ashamed for many years. Additionally, the quarrels and disputes between the parties could have unraveled the match. At one point, the arguments escalated to the degree that they wanted to remove the veil from the bride, and great is the value of peace between husband and wife. Certainly, one should be stringent and careful to ensure that such situations do not arise. However, if all efforts were made, but time dragged on to nightfall, and there is a concern for the dissolution of the match or the bride's humiliation?
Humiliation, yeah.
Okay. My brain.
Embarrassment.
Okay. One who relies on the leniency has not erred. This is the declaration of Moshe Shana, esteemed and pious Rabbi Yisrael of blessed memory, known as Moshe Isserlis of KRAKOW.
Beautiful. What is the Ramah telling us? He's telling us essentially that I have a big counterweight. I have a big, large Jewish value, which is also a human value, by the way. We're going to learn a lot more about this value in our next course, for those of you that are joining, for all humankind, when we're going to talk about universal Jewish values that apply to non-Jews in the next course that we do, which is after Pesach. We're going to talk a lot more about that. And the value of shalom bayis, of peace in the home and not embarrassing people. Anyways, but this is a very, very core Jewish value, okay? And this Jewish value is not enough, even though it's so core and even though it's so important. It's not like pikuach nefesh. It's not enough it's not like the risk of someone's life or the endangerment of someone's life, which is enough to push some mitzvahs off the charts completely. No. It's not enough to push this law, this halacha, into oblivion. But it is enough to push us to say, okay, we're going to take the minority opinion because we have on whom to rely. Okay? And that is what Rabbi Moshe Isserlish is saying. And by the by, we're getting some very interesting insight that there's something called a heter. Heter is halachic dispensation. How is a heter possible? How can you come to a rabbi about a case that you know of, or many people know of, that is not allowed on Shabbat, or not allowed on whatever, in a case of marriage, or whatever it is, and the rabbi says, I'm allowed to? The answer is, if he has a Torah-based counterweight that can lead to taking a pre-existing valid but minority halachic approach and using that as a heter and using that as an allowance in this situation. And that happens all the time in halacha. Again, we're not eliminating the Torah system. We're not eliminating the halachic system. What we're doing is we're saying we're going to take the minority opinion in this case because the Torah itself pushes us in that direction with this big counterweight. And that's why, by the way, this is a big part of why you need shimush in order to be a rabbi. Shimush means apprenticeship, to actually work under another rabbi, to watch him use all these things, and to see how this system works, so that you can also apply this same system on your own. Now, obviously, this says a lot about the Ramah, by the way, because the Ramah must have had very broad shoulders to be able to say he thinks this is enough in order to push it. But he did feel that it was enough, and that is the way that he did it. Now, I want to say something. Which I really emphasized over and over again in this lesson, in this course, which is, he was not using his intuition. He wasn't just feeling bad for the bride. Really this is the halacha, but you just look so pitiful. And you really have tugged at my heartstrings, so therefore I'm just going to ignore the halacha and do this. No. He is taking her feelings into account. He's taking her embarrassment into account, but it's only enough to be able to push him. It's only enough to do so because of a Jewish value, kavod abrios. It's also only enough because he's going to take a minority opinion. He's not going to make up a new halacha or go against halacha. Okay, let's pause here for a question that I think Steve Muller has. He's been waiting so patiently to interject.
I promise it's relevant.
Go ahead.
All right. So the possibility of, if it's only the possibility of having to write that makes it prohibited to get married on Shabbos, then when is the marriage official? At what point? When the bracha is said and they go around 7 times and they smash the glass, or when they sign the ketubah? So
I'll clarify something for you. It seems to me that you're laboring under the impression that at a regular wedding, nothing to do with Shabbat, a wedding that happens on a Tuesday, it seems to me you're laboring under the impression that when they sign the ketubah, they're already married. That is clearly not the case. No, absolutely not. There's only 3 ways for a person to be married. One of them is with a ketubah. Let me do the other 2 first. One is by consummating the marriage, and having in mind that that's for the sake of marriage. Another one is by giving them an object of monetary value that's worth more than a minimal amount, and saying, "Harei Adam Kadosh li, you are betrothed to me with this amount." And the third one is with a ketubah, but it's not the writing of the ketubah that does it. It's actually the mesiras ketubah. In fact, there's a whole discussion in the Talmud about the fact that there have to be 2 witnesses who witness the writing of the ketubah and are actually signed on the ketubah, and then there's to be a separate set of 2 witnesses that observe the passing over of the ketubah. In fact, if any of you have intention to attend a religious wedding sometime soon, you can observe that. You will watch, and they announce all these people because these are all honored positions. They call out, like, I remember who mine were. It was Rabbi Yosef Shurpin and Rabbi Beryl Garowitz, who were my witnesses. They flew in for my wedding. They were here in Los Angeles, and they watched me give the ketubah to Gitti. They were called up first. The MC calls them up and says, "We would like to call up," and they have to not be related, not to me, not to Gitti, not to each other. The 2 witnesses, that is, cannot be related to each other. I think they can't be related to the Rav, to the rabbi who's officiating. That I may be mistaken on. In any event, they call them up, and they're the official witnesses. And the first thing that happens, if there's a competent Rav there, and by me there was a competent Rav, it was my grandfather and Gitti's uncle, Lahavza ben Chaim L'chaim. My grandfather's still with us, Baruch Hashem, but Gitti's uncle has since passed on, Rabbi Shimi Reichik. They were both standing there, and I can show you a video of this if you want. They call up the 2 witnesses, and they talk to them. They say, "Hey, we want to show you the ring," because the custom today is that we betroth with all 3 ways that are halachically work. So you consummate the marriage that night, you give over something of monetary value, and you give a document, which is the ketubah of marriage. So the witnesses have to see all 3 of those. Now, they don't have to actually see the marriage consummated. They have to see the bride and groom be secluded for a period of time. I don't know how this turned into a marriage course, but that's okay. That's the next course really we're giving, is a marriage course, the art of marriage, if anybody wants to join that one. But I'll just explain how all that happens. When the 2 witnesses are called up, the first thing that the Rav will do is the Rav will show them the ketubah. They'll honor somebody with reading the ketubah, and then they'll watch. Let's say in my case, I was the groom. I would give the ketubah to Gitti. They would watch me give it to her. Boom, they watch that. Then they would give them the ring to examine. Take a look at this ring. Does it look It doesn't even have to be gold or silver, so they don't bother asking them that because gold or silver is way above the minimal amount. But they asked them, they asked me, is this ring yours? So if my mother bought it for me, which my instance was not, I specifically wanted to pay for it, but let's say my mom or dad had paid for it, I would have to actually get it from them as a gift first, because it has to be mine when I betroth Gitti. It's not my parents betrothing Gitti, right? No matter how arranged the marriage is, it's still the groom that's betrothing the bride. And then the witnesses would have to watch me place the ring on her finger. Boom, they watch that. And the third thing they watch is they go into the room first before the bride and groom go in. They make sure there's no windows, no doors. Has to be a room with no windows, no doors. When we do weddings at Chabad of Pasadena, we use the library. Then they go into that room. The witnesses go into that room. They make sure there's no other way for them to go out. So it means if two people go into, they'll be secluded alone, which is something that, according to Jewish law, only a married man and woman would do. And any windows into the room, like for example here at Chabad, we have a window that faces the hallway, so we would put something that blocks that window because it has to be completely private. You then close the door. They don't have to do anything in there. The bride and groom don't even have to touch each other, but they have to be in there for the amount of time that in theory they could have consummated the marriage. Yes, halacha discusses this to see exactly how long this is, and then once the witnesses guard the door. Once that amount of time passed by, boom, they've observed what we call the consummation of the marriage. And then, or at least the potential consummation of the marriage. And then, however long the bride and groom want to be in there for, they can be in there for, but as long as it's past that minimal amount of time, which I think is just a few minutes, and then after that, they come out, and that officially secures the marriage. So in other words, Steve, what I'm trying to tell you is, this was a very long-winded answer, but I think we had the time for it. We'll soon find out. What I was trying to tell you was that signing a ketubah does nothing. It's only the passing over of the ketubah.
So that can be postponed until Saturday night after.
And in
sunset.
this instance, it was.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In this instance, it was postponed to 90 minutes after thing. Okay.
Right.
I want to add one
postscript. You want to finish? I have a question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tova Jane. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it says that they were betrothed, and my understanding is once that the passing of the consideration, the peruta, the little bit of
peruta, yes, the minimum value.
Peruta, takes place at the time of betrothal. So they were already betrothed. It seems to me that they agree. Well, I'm, my lawyer head.
Yeah, so I think you're making a distinction between kiddushin and nisuyin. Is that correct? Like the two.
No, I think since betrothal was at least biblical Talmudic times, like big deal. Not like we're doing it now all mushed together.
Right.
Betrothal really was when the couple.
Right. So the answer is this wasn't that long ago. It was the 1500s. I think we said that the year was, right? Which is quite a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago like you're thinking in Talmudic times where it was two totally separate things that sometimes were separated by a year in Talmudic times. No, here it was one mushed together just like we do it today. So the marriage was either going to happen or not.
Why would it say they were betrothed? And we could take hours on this.
I don't know why they use those terms.
My legal brain and what.
Right. Okay.
Let's move on. We're
going to move on. But before we go on to the next case, I just want to do a little postscript because this is a lot of fun. Page 164. Page 164. What you have in front of you is a page of the Shulchan Aruch, page of the Jewish Code of Law. Okay. Now I need to tell you that the Ramah wrote two major works. He wrote a few works, but one of them is called the Darkei Moshe. Darkei Moshe means the ways of Moshe. And that was written before his glosses on the Shulchan Aruch. And crucially, if you look at the introduction to it, he signs his name, Rabbi Moshe, the son of Israel, without the honorific title of blessed memory. Okay? In other words, it happened before the current story that we just read. Who just read the last text? I think that was Tova Jane. You'll see that she read Moshe, the son of the esteemed and pious Rabbi Yisrael of blessed memory. Okay? So the Darkei Moshe, which is one of his works, is written before this episode. In it, he brings the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. But he does not start to get into detail about when you would use that rabbinic allowance, that rabbinic halachic dispensation. Now, what you have in front of you on page 164 is his glosses to the Shulchan Aruch, which is written after the current story that we just read, the KRAKOW couple. So we have two works of his, one that was written before and one that was written after. Let's take a look at what he writes, only for those that read Hebrew and read Rashi letters. If you don't, you'll have to trust me. So the bold letters are the first two words, Velo Mekadshin, are Rabbi Yosef Kairo's words, which are, that's the halacha, you're not allowed to betrothed on Shabbat. Says the Rama, remember this is post the Krakow couple story. He says, V'yesh haga, which means gloss, V'yesh matirin, there are those that allow it, lekadish, to betroth on Shabbat. Heicha de'ein lo isha banim, if he does not have a wife or children yet, in other words, he has not been married yet, hasn't had children yet. Ve'efshe dehu adin ichnisa lechupa shari. He says, and it's possible that if he had already brought her into the chuppah, we would allow it. Even though normally we don't say this, and still, we rely on this minority opinion. He's referring, of course, to Rabbeinu Tam. In a situation of constraint, gam, especially ki gadol kovod habrios, because we are very worried about respecting creatures, right? About not embarrassing people. He says, as has been the case in instances where two sides have not been able to come to terms about the dowry, b'yom shishi on a Friday, ad alayla until the night, the osin chuppah v'kiddush b'leil Shabbat, that they will still make the chuppah on and the betrothal and everything on Shabbat. Because they already prepared the meal, and it may embarrass the bride and the groom if they don't bring them in then. Originally, we should be careful that we shouldn't get to this. What do we see here? It's just a fascinating behind-the-scenes look at the way the Ramah wrote his glosses to the Shulchan Aruch. By the time he was writing this, even though he had already written this law in the Darkei Moshe, now he had the experience of an actual story that had played out, which he actually made a bold move about. And now he's codifying this in the Jewish code of law. Until today, that remains the halacha. Now, notice, he makes two things the halacha. Number one is that you would be allowed to make the wedding on Shabbat if necessary in such a situation because of this big counterweight. But more importantly, he says, better to avoid it. Make sure everything is taken care of so you don't get to this situation. In other words, he's learning from his own mistakes. He's like, maybe marriages shouldn't be done on Fridays. Maybe if they're done on Fridays, a week before you should meet with the bride and groom and make sure the dowry is arranged. Whatever it is, let's figure out so we don't get to this crazy sort of situation. So I just thought that's a fun postscript to this story. Okay. The next thing I want to do with you is, I want to turn to the back of this lesson. Let me get you the exact page number. Hold on. Because we're not going to have enough time to do all of these big counterweights which become part of, which can push back on Jewish law and let's say push us towards a minority opinion or something like that. But if you turn to page 150, you will see a massive spread of different types of examples of halachic counterweights. Okay? One that you
what page, Rabbi?
I'm on page one. I said 150. I meant 180. Page 180. It's right past the lesson. Okay, right past lesson 4. So the first one, the Fnim Mishurat Hadin, we're not going to get into. Okay, that's called going beyond the letter of the law. And you know what? I could say it very briefly. Basically, sometimes we'll rule that something should be one way, but come on, be a mensch and do the right thing, and that's a counterweight. In other words, sometimes we'll say to somebody, yes, that's the law. The law is you're allowed to do this thing that you're doing, which is messing somebody over in business. You're right according to the law, but be a mensch about it. And we'll tell them to go beyond the letter of the law. The second one is marit ayin, which we've discussed a lot about. I think at one point we discussed a coffee with almond milk, or bringing a non-dairy ice cream to the table at the end of a meat meal, right? What is marit ayin? Marit ayin means avoiding the appearance of wrongdoing. Sometimes you might be allowed to eat the ice cream at the end of a meat meal, but we'll tell you, no. Bring it in the container or put the almonds on the table or whatever it is in order to avoid the optics of it looking bad. Okay, shat hashmad means standing up to religious persecution. You might be allowed to do certain things in a case of danger, but if they're persecuting us religiously, we might say, no, then you shouldn't do them. You shouldn't budge 1 inch about Judaism. Again, a counterweight. Pikuach nefesh, the most famous one, preserving life. You might be prohibited from doing this on Shabbat, but because it's going to save a life, therefore you're allowed to do it. Preserving health, which is a lower level than preserving life, right? That's another one. Tsar gadol means eliminating distress. Shelo levayish is mishe'ein lo, protecting the poor from shame. Dignity, preserving dignity. Shat atchak, reacting sensitively to pressing circumstances, avoiding significant financial loss. Believe it or not, that becomes a big counterweight. We don't want. There's an expression in the Gemara, "Hatayra chasa mamaynon shel Yisrael," that the Torah cares about the money of Jewish people. So if there's going to be a massive financial loss, we'll say, you know what? Really, you're not allowed to do this. This happens all the time with kosher. Okay, some meat and milk gets mixed. You come to the rabbi, you tell him what happens. He says, listen, according to the law, this meat and milk means it's not kosher. Then you tell him, are you kidding me, Rabbi? This is like $500,000 at stake. And he goes, ooh, you didn't tell me that. Okay, boom. He starts to look. He finds a minority opinion. He says, because there's massive financial loss, you're allowed to rely on that minority opinion. Again, he's not bending the law. This is within the framework of halacha, because there's a big counterweight on the other side, which is we care about the money of Jewish people. Therefore, we'll do this. Same thing, tzorich mitzvah, in order to allow for a mitzvah, tiruch de tzibura, avoiding factionalism, avoiding arrogant behavior, refraining from casting aspersions on earlier generations. All of these are religious counterweights, which means they are within the framework of halacha. They are values of Judaism that we are trying to maintain, but within the framework of halacha, we'll use it, but not outside of the framework of halacha. It can't just push us to do whatever we want, but within the framework of halacha, we will use it. Okay. Let's do one more, shall we? One more counterweight. The liturgical disturbances. Okay, so please turn back to our lesson. And we're going
165.
It's at page 165. Thank you, Steve, for the page number there. And before we do this, I need to tell you a little bit about the evolution of prayer. Okay? Much about Jewish prayer is actually codified by the Talmud. The prayers that you do today. If you were to open up a tractate, brachot, Tavajane, did you learn brachot yet? I assume so.
Yeah, a long
Then I
time
imagine
ago.
you saw a lot of the way that our prayers today are codified. Meaning, you see, oh yeah, there's going to be a Shema, there's going to be blessings before, blessings after. These are roughly the way the blessing is supposed to be said. This is the Amidah, this is how many blessings the Amidah has. Beautiful. But even though the core of Jewish prayer has been consistent across all communities, minor variations in liturgy developed in areas where the Talmud didn't provide definitive rulings. This is why Jews in Germany, Spain, Italy, Yemen each developed their own nusach. Nusach means a prayer rite or a liturgy that they pray with, and this is the way they pray. In the 18th century, first the 16th century. In the 16th century, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who is known as the Arizal, taught Kabbalah in Tzfat. I assume most of you are familiar with this. This profoundly influenced the entire Jewish world in many ways, not least of which was that he developed a nusach, a liturgy or a prayer rite based on Kabbalah, and the foundation for it was the Spanish nusach. Okay. All of this comes to a head in the 18th century. What happens?
You got a stroimel.
Yeah, we didn't just get a stroimel. In the 18th century, we get Hasidism. Baal Shem Tov arrives in the 17th century. In the 18th century, the Alter Rebbe arrives. Hasidism is founded, and then Chabad Hasidism is founded, etc. Okay. This is when the Hasidic movement emerged in Eastern Europe, and it sought to revitalize Jewish life. And there were a lot of things about it that were very different from the way Judaism was viewed at the time. Judaism was very serious up until that point. And they brought back a sense of joy and happiness to Judaism. Judaism should be something you're excited about. They brought an emphasis on the fact that every Jew is valuable to God, not just one who is knowledgeable in Torah. Even a simple Jew has a place in Hashem's world and in the mission that Hashem has. Anyways, one of the things that they affected greatly was prayer. Okay, so now let's zoom in on a city called Belarus, which is White Russia. The city is called Borisov in the region of Belarus. And it's 1792, and a conflict breaks out in the city of Borisov. What happens? A lot of younger men, a lot of younger generation is very inspired by the Alter Rebbe, the Hasidic movement in general, and they start davening the Nusach Ari, the Nusach of the Arizal, the liturgical version, the prayer rite of the Arizal, who again was the Kabbalist, lived in the 16th century in Spain, in Tzfat. But the Alter Rebbe really popularized his way of praying. And so many of them started praying this way that a minyan broke off, right? You know, every city has the shul you go to, and the shul you would never step foot into. So this happened here. A new shul broke out. Younger people, very Hasidic influenced, and they're praying with the Arizal's Nusach. In other words, they departed from the entrenched Nusach, which I think was Ashkenazi Nusach, in their city. And this upset, as you can imagine, many of the older generation who were not, so as usual, they don't take on the new wave and the new mode of things, right? And they're still stuck in their old ways, and they're like, hey, what's going on here? And you have a conflict. Who's the city's rabbi? The city's rabbi is Rabbi Eliezer Katz. Rabbi Eliezer Katz basically took the side of the parents, but not because he felt like they were right, not because he didn't like the Hasidim. No, he did his best according to Torah. This conflict was brought to him, and he did his best according to Torah to answer it. What happens? Can the young Hasidim change the liturgy? He says no, they can't. And as a result, he writes a letter to the younger Hasidim were not listening to him. So he writes a letter to the Alter Rebbe in Liadi, right across, I don't know, this is Belarus, that's Russia, whatever. Maybe it's Ukraine. I don't remember. I'm losing my geography here a little bit. But basically, he writes them and says, you should really tell the younger Hasidim that the Rav Paskin, the rabbi, said that this is the way it's supposed to be. So therefore, they should follow the law and do it. And he gives the Alter Rebbe all the reasons, the halachic reasons. In other words, remember, every rabbi, as we said last week, has to cite precedent. You have to go back to the Talmud. You have to go back to the Torah. You have to go back to the whatever it is to say why. And he gives the Alter Rebbe this lengthy letter. Now, we don't have his letter, but we have the Alter Rebbe's response to him. And the Alter Rebbe is going to disagree with him. And at the end, a big counterweight is going to come into play. Let's see what he says. Elise, do you think you can read for us, please? We're holding text 5. Page 166, standing with the parents.
I could read. Okay. You can read. Okay. To the esteemed and renowned Rabbi Eliezer Katz, I hope my brevity in responding to all the detailed questions and extensive arguments in your letter does not offend you. God knows and bears witness that time has not allowed me to write at great length. Perhaps it will be God's will that we will meet during one of my visits to Poland, where we can talk in person. It is clear from your letter that you are a true lover of peace, like your ancestor, Aaron the high priest, who loved peace and pursued peace. As a result, you have intervened in the matter of those in your community who oppose the new congregation. You sided with the parents protesting their son's attendance due to the changes in the liturgy, which, according to your honorable opinion, are improper. You assume that the parents, too, are acting with pure intentions for the sake of heaven.
Okay. The Alter Rebbe's Teshuvah, his responsa, goes on to reveal that Rabbi Katz presented two opposing arguments for why the younger people following a new nusach was not allowed. Number one, it contradicts the command to honor parents, right? Just this past Shabbat, we read the 10 Commandments in Shul, right? And there's a mitzvah that every single Jew has, which is to follow. One of the 10 Commandments is a mitzvah that every single Jew has to honor your parents. So he says, them diverging from their parents' tradition is being disrespectful to their parents. Number one. The second argument that he seems to make is the Talmud repeatedly emphasizes the importance of preserving Jewish customs. Okay? And here, they are clearly just going against Jewish customs, making their own Jewish customs. There's a good song about this in The Fiddler on the Roof. How does it go?
Tradition.
Right? You're going against tradition. You're going against the customs that have already been entrenched in some way or another. Okay. So the Alter Rebbe says, let me deal with these two issues one at a time. And he therefore quotes, he's going to take us to two different stories to show us why each of these issues is not valid. What are they? The first one is the marriage showdown. All right? Is everybody dizzy yet from the time machine? Does anybody remember when we are now? We're in the 1790s, yes? 1790s. Rabbi Eliezer Katz of Borisov writes to the Alter Rebbe writes back. The Alter Rebbe is now going to take us where? He's going to take us to Rabbi Yosef Kolon, or the Maharik. Does anybody remember who he is? The Maharik was a rabbi in the 1300s, if I remember correctly. Sorry, 1400s, in Italy. And we already mentioned he was the author of a widely quoted responsa. The last one that we did from him, I think, was about the blood libel. And he was posed a very interesting question. Does the Torah allow a person to marry someone that their parents disapprove of? Okay, some background again, because again, this arrests all of our Western, value system, if you will. This is a very unfortunate one. It's very unfortunate that in the United States, it has in Western society in general, it's become very, very popular for parents to attempt to be friends of their children. I don't know if this is because people are more lonely today than they ever were, so they don't have, for the parents don't have friends, the children don't have friends. But unfortunately, this is not the way it's supposed to be set up to be. Both from a Torah perspective, but even more than that. When I've given parenting classes here at Chabad, I always talk about this. Your children need a parental figure. A parental figure is very, very different than a buddy, a friend. And in today's society, there's so much emphasis on like, oh yeah, my parent is my best friend. I call my father by his first name, etc. This completely goes against the Torah value, which is that there's supposed to be two things, right? You're supposed to honor your parents, and you're supposed to revere or fear your parents. This basically amounts to loving your parents and respecting your parents. Two different values, which is the way that the Torah set it up. And unfortunately, today we don't have a lot of this in the United States. But notwithstanding, let's try and unpack and understand how this works. Steve, if you can read for us, please, text 6, which is not the 10 Commandments, but it's the Talmud describing this value from the 10 Commandments. Go for it. This mitzvah.
Okay, how do we define the biblical mandates to revere and honor parents? To revere means not standing in their place, not sitting in their place, not contradicting their words, and not taking sides against them. To honor means helping them with food and drink, clothing and covering, and coming and going.
Okay, so Rabbi Yosef Kolon starts off by quoting precedent. He's going to quote the Talmud, right? So he quotes the Talmud, describing, he's like, you claim that there's an issue. Okay, so I don't know if I told you the whole story to the previous story, right? He was asked about a dispute between a father and son over a marriage decision. Sorry, this is a little out of order. I should have done this earlier, but let me clarify now. Shall we? Here we go. Rabbi Yosef Kolon, the Marik, lives in Italy, and he gets a letter, a dispute between a father and a son over a marriage. What happened? Remember, this was a period when arranged marriages were the norm. What happened was there was a son that sought to persuade his father to travel to another city on his behalf. Hey, Dad, could you do me a favor? Go to this city to do some business, whatever for it. The father was hesitating. Why was the father hesitating? Because obviously there was already a girl in the picture. He was afraid that during his absence, the son would marry someone that he didn't endorse, that the father didn't want him to marry. So the son wants his father to leave. So in order to get his father to leave, he says to his father, I'm going to swear that I will not get married without your consent. Okay? Now, the father got that swearing. It was enough for him. He leaves. Right after the oath, he leaves to go out of town. As soon as the father left the room, the son declared before witnesses that he had been coerced by the circumstances to make this oath and declared the oath null. He says, I had to do it to get my father to leave town, but I did not mean it. And I'm telling that to you in front of these two witnesses. What do you think happened while the father was away? The son betrothed the woman. The father came back, and he's upset. He doesn't want him to marry this girl. So he says to the son, I'm taking you to the court of law. I'm taking you to the Beit Din. Why? You swore that you're not going to get married while I'm gone, and it's against Kibbud of Aim. It goes counter. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. No, that could have been an important message. Just want to make sure. It goes against the Jewish mitzvah of honoring and respecting your parents. Okay. So there's now two questions that are being asked of the Marik. First of all, was the oath binding? To which the Marik rules that nothing about this oath was coerced, so the marriage could not proceed without the father's consent. So in the end, the marriage didn't work. But he was also asked about the second part of the story. He was asked, and that's the question we had on the screen with us just a second ago. Here it is. He was asked, does the Torah allow a person to marry someone their parents disapprove of? And on this question, he proceeds to answer, even though it's not relevant, because the oath he said was binding. Right? But he still wants to talk about this issue. So in order to talk about this issue, he starts by quoting text 6. Okay, we're now back caught up where we should have been. This is the way I should have done it, and Steve should have read text 6 now. Okay, what is text 6? Text 6 is in the Talmud. Steve already read it for us. It tells us what honor and reverence respectively are from a Jewish perspective. What is honor? Honor is tending to their needs. Okay? Anything your father needs. So, if your father wants you to walk him to shul, that is tending to his needs. Okay. If your father does not want you to tell him what to do, let's say doesn't want you to tell him how to pray, you have an obligation not to tell him anything like that. Why? Because reverence means respecting their space. If your father wants to tell you, don't go to a different shul and pray in a different shul, he's allowed to tell that to you, and you should respectfully not answer him. But once you drop your father off at shul and you're continuing to walk down the street, you going to another shul is not violating any of these two things. You're not avoiding, you're not prohibiting, you're not tending to their needs, and you're not disrespecting their space. So you're allowed to go and do whatever you want. In other words, a parent cannot tell a child what they can do in their own lives. That's them overstepping their boundaries, if you will. Okay? So therefore, on the first question, he said the oath was binding. But does the Torah allow a person to marry someone their parents disapprove of? On this, he's going to say yes. Let's read it inside, shall we? Ron, text 7, the limits of authority.
I have one quick question. In the definition for honor, the last item on there, it says coming and going. What is that? Hello?
Yeah, Ron, hello?
Yeah, the last on the definition of honor, it says covering, and then it says coming and going. What does that mean?
What do you see coming and going?
Look on the text 6, the bottom part.
Text 6 on the bottom part.
Yeah.
Happy with food and drink, clothing, and covering and coming and going. To walk your father to shul. To walk your father to where he needs to go.
Oh, coming. Oh, okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. So now, let's read how the Marik is going to apply this to the current situation and why he's going to say that marriage decisions are totally the child's, and it's not disrespectful to marry someone your parents don't want you to marry.
Okay, we're reading text 7, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay. It is obvious that a parent does not have the authority to object to a child's marital decisions, neither on the basis of honor nor reverence. Honor applies only to actions related to food, drink, clothing, footwear, and similar things related to the parent's needs. Reverence means not sitting in their place, not contradicting their words, and the like, matters specifically related to the parents. But in matters unrelated to the parents, they obviously have no authority to interfere with their child's actions.
So I think a lot of us walk around thinking, oh, honor your father and mother, yeah, whatever, as much as you could, you do what you can, you love them, you hug them, this is what it means to honor them. No, but it turns out that this is halachically codified. There are details to it. What does fall into it, what does fall into it, and what doesn't fall into it. And you know what does not fall into it? Them overstepping their boundaries and interfering in your life is not your responsibility to fear them in that regard, to respect them in that regard. You cannot stick it in their face. You cannot somehow get involved in their space, but their space extending to your space is not your obligation. So says the Maharik. By the way, this becomes codified in Jewish law by the Ramah 200 years later, and even by the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe then goes on in his Teshuvah. What does he say? He says, one of the arguments that you, Rabbi Eliezer Katz of Borisov, told me is that children cannot pray with a different nusach than their parents because of the responsibility of respecting their parents. He says, no. Take a look at this shut from the Maharik, and you'll see that he clarified this very clearly. No, a parent cannot. So let's say there's a guy whose name is Yankel, and he lives in Borisov, and he has a son whose name is Feivel. Yankel of Borisov is elderly and needs someone to walk him to shul. It is Feivel's obligation to walk him to shul, like Ron said, the coming and the going. After shul, he needs somebody to come pick him up and bring him to someone's house so that he can eat, or bring him food to shul so that he can eat. Absolutely, that's all Feivel's responsibility to his father Yankel. Even when he walks him into shul, and he's going to get a siddur off the shelf because it's hard for Yankel to get it, and he's respecting his father, he has to get the nusach that his father wants to daven. But when he walks out and goes to his own shul, he's allowed to daven whatever nusach he wants, even if his father tells him not to. Why? Because that would be the father's the father overstepping and overreaching, it doesn't fall under any of the two categories. So says the Alter Rebbe, based on that, there's no reason to tell the youngsters to daven with the same nusach as their parents. Okay? But there was a second opposing argument. Rabbi Eliezer Kavkat said that it contradicts the value of preserving Jewish customs. So, in order to get to this, we need to understand a little bit about the whole system of halacha. Mm-hmm. When we say that there's a law that you have to do this or that, it can be referring to one of two things. Either a biblical law, something that basically is learned directly out of the Torah. The Torah commands us to do X, Y, Z. Or a rabbinic law, such as, for example, the ban on betrothing on Shabbat, lest you come to writing. Yes, that's a rabbinic law. There's biblical laws, there's rabbinic laws. But both of those fall under the category of laws. However, the halacha also recognizes a third category, and that is minhagim, or customs. Customs are things that are initiated by individuals, families, communities, as a way to enhance their service of Hashem. By the way, it's one of the most beautiful parts of Judaism, because it's where we actually get actively involved in our Judaism. Right? So even if honoring parents isn't a factor, it's not a law, maybe there's just a custom. It's a long-standing minhag to pray in a certain nusach, and now you're going to change that? Let's turn our attention to the video screens as we begin to answer this question, okay? Essentially what's going to happen here is the Alter Rebbe is going to take us to another pivotal teshuvah, another pivotal responsa, this time authored by Rabbi Shmuel of Medina, otherwise known as the Marshdam, who was a prominent authority in the 16th century in Salonika. And that century was a time of considerable movement and immigration within the Jewish world, and this question about minhagim is going to take center stage. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
Between the 14th and 16th centuries, Jewish life in Western Europe unraveled, torn apart by wave after wave of forced expulsion. In France, Jews were expelled not once, but 3 times during the 14th century, the final blow falling in 1394. In the closing decade of the 15th century, the Jews were banished from Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, Portugal, Navarre, and Provence. And the 16th century brought fresh waves of displacement from Calabria, Apulia, Naples, and the Papal States. With each decree, centuries of tradition and memory were uprooted, and the map of Jewish Europe steadily shrank. But as the gates of the West slammed shut, new doors opened in the East. The Ottoman Empire became a haven for the displaced. Istanbul, Cairo, Salonika, and high in the hills of the Holy Land, Safed. These cities welcomed the exiles and offered the chance to rebuild. In these bustling ports and mountaintop towns, Jews from every corner of Europe found themselves side by side, each carrying their unique traditions. What happens when centuries of ancestral customs from distinct communities are forced to come together? A responsum written in 16th century Salonika by Rabbi Shmuel de Medina offers a rare and telling glimpse into that moment. He describes how the Ashkenazim, migrants from the German lands, held fast to their ancestral customs, living contentedly in Salonika alongside fellow Jews whose prayer rites differed in some details. But in most cases, a different pattern emerged. Jews expelled from Provence, Calabria, Sicily, and Apulia gradually gave up their inherited prayer rites and adopted the Sephardic version. The reason was simple. The Sephardim, Jews who had fled Spain and Portugal, formed the majority in the Ottoman cities. Still, not everyone was ready to blend in. Rabbi Shmuel writes of one immigrant community divided over the issue. Most members wanted to switch to the Sephardic rite, but others insisted on praying the way their ancestors had prayed. The question was brought to Rabbi Shmuel de Medina.
May a community abandon its ancestral liturgy for another? The Sephardic rite was well established, but it was not their own.
Were they bound to honor their past, or free to adapt to what was more popular in the present? This question about alterations to custom and liturgy offers a revealing glimpse into the fabric of Jewish life in the 16th century.
so we have a question on the table. Hold on, let me pull it up. By the way, we're going to skip, obviously, text the map and text 8. That was all in the video. The question on the table, is it permissible for people to change their liturgy? So we're going to precedent. Okay, so, right, so he's dealing, just wait here, it's fine. He's dealing with people from the city of, from all these mixes of Sephardim and Ashkenazim, etc. Are they able to change their liturgy? This is going to be very, very relevant to the Alter Rebbe's question about in the 1800s, sorry, in the 18th century, the 1700s, about whether they can change their liturgy or not. Yes, very good. So let's consider how we would answer this question. All right, and we're going to do so by introducing you to some Talmudic precedent. This is what Rabbi Shmuel of Medina is going to do. It's going to be text 9. Let's read it first, and then I'll clarify what's going on over here. I think we're holding Tova Jane again. Go for it.
Okay. The people of Bashan had the custom not to go from Tyre to Sidon on Friday. The children went to Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, "For our ancestors, this was possible. For us, it is impossible. For our ancestors, this was possible. For us, it's impossible." Said he to them, "Your ancestors have already taken this stringency upon themselves." And it says, Proverbs 1:8, "Hear, my child, the instructions of your father, and forsake not the teachings of your mother."
Okay, so let me explain. This becomes the origin for sticking to customs, okay? Let me explain. Fridays on the coastal city of Sidon, which is basically modern-day Lebanon, were bustling market days. Merchants and shoppers from Tyre, which is also in modern-day Lebanon, traveled on Friday morning by sea to take part in the economic opportunity and returning home by evening. But the Jewish community of Bishan, which was a suburb of Tyre, observed a long-standing custom to refrain from making this journey. Why? And by the way, till today, this is the case. There are some people who will never take a flight on a Friday. Never. Why? Flights can be delayed, you get stuck somewhere. Other people, they'll never take a flight with a stopover on a Friday. Just last night, Kitty and I were discussing tickets for Pesach. We're planning to go to New York. And the way back, after Pesach ends on a Thursday night. And she wants to be back before Shabbat. She would like for the family to be back before Shabbat in order to be back in time, because preschool starts, I guess, on Monday, and whatever she has stuff she wants to do. She wants to get home, settle down, and then start again, right? So we've been looking at tickets on Friday. I found a good ticket with a stopover. It's supposed to get here at 12 p.m. Kitty's like, no, we don't take stopovers on a Friday. You see, this is an ancient version of the same thing. Now, what happened, as usually happens? Okay, so they took upon themselves, basically, the people of Pishon, never to travel to Sidon on a Friday. Why? You should have enough time to satisfy the biblical mitzvah of experiencing pleasure on Shabbat through enjoyable, lavish meals and preparing them on Friday, etc., etc., etc. They were also worried they might come back late, etc. This is a custom. Doesn't say anything of this nature, not in biblical law and not either in Rabbinic law. Okay, but what happens over time? Economic hardship causes later generations to question the custom. Maybe there was also advanced technology like there is today. Like, for example, for my Zaidi to say he never flies on Friday because you never know what's going to happen, it was in an era when, flying on a plane was a whole to-do. I better get dressed up to fly on the plane. There was a whole production, whatever, right? Today, we pop on a plane and pop back and forth and back and forth. I go to New York 10 times a year, 15 times a year, right? It's not a big deal to pop over. So we're like, flying on a Friday. So could be the world's technological advances. They asked that question of the leading sage of the time, Rabbi Yochanan, and what happens? He says, accept it. This is the minhag of your parents. You should listen to it. According to this passage, what is Rabbi Shmuel of Medina going to say? Right? If you have to adhere to your parents' custom about traveling on a Friday or not traveling on a Friday, what's he going to say? Right? You could see it going both ways. Why? You could see it being the same type of custom, or perhaps it's a different type of custom. For example, there are some customs that are protective, right? It's a custom that prevents neglect of halacha. That's what we're talking about here, right? There are some customs that are general, customs that enhance Jewish life, like just whatever, the nusach you daven with, etc. As we're going to see, Rabbi Shmuel of Medina is going to take that argument. Is it possible for people to change their liturgy? Let's see how Rabbi Shmuel of Medina says it. Steve, if you read for us, please, text 10.
Oh, okay. The Talmudic evidence suggests that the insistence to retain ancestral customs apply to those that protect one from a prohibition. even just a trace of a prohibition. However, in a case like this, where the custom isn't designed to protect against any aspect of the transgression, the principle, forsake not the teaching of your mother, does not apply.
Okay, so Shmuel Medina basically says like this. He says, I went back to the Talmud. I went back to the origin. And I saw what the origin is for keeping a minhag. You know what the origin is for keeping a minhag? Because you should follow in your parents' way when they are trying to guard you from doing something against the Torah. Such as the people of Bishon not traveling to Tyre in order for their market days on a Friday. Yes? Beautiful. Hold on one second. However, he says, this minhag that you're asking that should be enforced, that you need to keep it because your parents kept it, is just a nice enhancement of a beautiful way of. That's supposed to be each person for their own. You don't must follow the way of your parents. It's nice if you do. But if you want to pray a different way than your parents, and it's also a beautiful way of connecting to Hashem, that's fine, because it's a different type of custom. So back to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe had two opposing arguments. One argument from Rabbi Eliezer Katz of Borisov was what? These young people can't change the prayer liturgy because it contradicts the commandment to honor the parents. Says the Alter Rebbe, no. I brought you a clear precedent where now a parent cannot overextend the respect that they demand of their children to infringe on the space of the children living their own lives. So that one doesn't apply. What about the value of preserving Jewish customs? He says, I have a clear precedent here from Shmuel Medina that only applies to customs that are going to protect you from violating the Torah. But if it's a regular custom that just helps you enhance Yiddishkeit, that's a whole different type of custom, right? And that one you're allowed to change. It isn't a protective custom, right? So says the Alter Rebbe, and this is nearing the end of the Alter Rebbe's letter. The Alter Rebbe says to Rabbi Eliezer Katz, I saw all of your arguments that the younger people need to follow the liturgy that their parents have, and they can't start a new minyan with new ones. And I reject all your arguments, and I have explained them one by one why I'm rejecting your arguments. But then a huge counterweight comes into play. This is the theme of today's lesson. Says the Alter Rebbe in text 11, there is a counterweight, a core Jewish value, which is peace. Darkei Shalom, in order to create peace between Jewish people. We shouldn't have separate groups of people that are arguing with each other, conflicting with each other, etc. We want to have peace and harmony among us. And that is going to override anything else, any other reason that they want to pray with this new liturgy. Ron, if you can read it for us, please, text 11, the value of peace.
However, since your intention is noble, aiming for the great mitzvah of bringing peace, I will join in supporting you. I will instruct and urge the congregation to maintain the Ashkenazic order of prayer from Baruch She'amar until the conclusion of the Amidah, provided that the locals heed your request to be at peace with the new congregation and refrain from provoking disputes with their children who wish to attend, for peace is vitally important. Thus speaks one who loves you and sincerely seeks your well-being.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's the Alter Rebbe. Shneir Zalman, son of my master, my father, my teacher, Baruch of blessed memory. Okay, so here we have exactly the same thing as what happened with the Ramah in the KRAKOW couple. What happens? You analyze the law. You go back and forth, right? Let's go back to the KRAKOW couple. What did we do with the KRAKOW couple? We analyzed the law. We went back and forth, and it turns out that what? That the majority opinion, the halacha follows that you should not do weddings on Shabbos. Comes a massive counterweight. And because we have other opinions on whom to rely, in that instance it was Rabbeinu Tam, but the counterweight is the dignity of the bride and groom and the loss of money that was spent on the wedding feast, and because of that we say, we're going to follow minority opinion, we're going to do a wedding on Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe is about to do something very, very similar. What happens? According to the usual law, the Alter Rebbe paskined, he went through all the law. He went to the Talmud, he went to previous Responsa, and he came to the conclusion that changing to the Arizal's liturgy was within these children's rights, was within these youngsters' rights. But what happens? A massive counterweight comes into play. The counterweight is because of communal peace. Says the Alter Rebbe, for peace, I will say, no, they shouldn't change their liturgy. Why? In order to maintain peace. And again, he's not bending halacha. This is within the system of halacha. He's saying within the system of halacha, even though the law should be that they should pray with this new liturgy, I'm going to tell them that they need to pray with the old liturgy. Why? In order to preserve peace in the town. And so, to conclude today's lesson, we've had two instances. We've seen at play rabbis, and I showed you so many other types that are in the back of your lesson on page 180. Rabbis who dug and literally jumped into the deep end with all the halachic sources to establish that the halacha is A, but then they ruled B for their particular instance, and their reasoning was because of a huge counterweight of another value of Judaism that comes into play, which is a beautiful and wonderful thing to think about in our halacha. Why? We usually think of halacha as black and white. This is right, this is wrong. And it's true, there is black and white in halacha. But in addition to black and white, there's also gray. There's also like, this is right, but we don't follow it. But in a case where a big counterweight comes in, we'll do so. And hopefully these two examples that we've shown today have helped you to understand them, and also to understand how when a rabbi just says, we're going to ignore the law for now, he's not actually ignoring it. He's using the law itself to paskin a different way, to rule a different way, because of some other huge Jewish value that's at play. Please turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson. Whoops. Where did it go? The video's not here?
No, I'm up to page five now.
No, whatever. Yeah, it looks like we didn't have it. Okay.
We can read it, Rabbi, if you need to.
It's okay. We know the summary of today's lesson. We don't need a video. Thank you all for joining us for... Let me bring you all back. Thank you all for joining us for lesson 4. This has been Counterweights Considered, and I look forward to seeing you all next week for lesson 5, the 5th factor, how emotional and situational wisdom shape rabbinic responses. In Yiddish, this next week's lesson is called Der Fünfter Chelik von Shulchan Aruch, the 5th volume of Shulchan Aruch, because Shulchan Aruch only has 4 volumes. So this is the 5th volume, common sense, if you will. Okay.
Can we have questions, Rabbi?
Oh, here's the video. Please turn your
can we do the video
screens for us to save today's lesson. They just did it a little bit out of order today. Okay, it's all good.
Lesson 4. Counterweights Considered. 1. Halacha includes fundamental values such as kavod habriot, human dignity, shalom bayit, marital harmony, and darchei shalom, communal peace. These principles often function as counterweights within the halachic process, recalibrating rulings in unforeseen ways. 2. When multiple interpretations of a Talmudic ruling exist, the majority view carries significant weight. However, a compelling halachic counterweight may justify reliance on a legitimate, albeit non-mainstream interpretation, resulting in a heter dispensation. 3. To uphold kavod habriot and shalom bayit, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis invoked Rabbeinu Tam's minority position, permitting a wedding initially scheduled for Friday to be conducted on Shabbat. 4. Rabbi Yosef Cologne demonstrated through Talmudic evidence that the mitzvot of honoring and revering parents apply exclusively to a parent's direct needs, not a child's personal decisions, such as whom to marry and which liturgy to adopt. 5. Rabbi Shmuel de Medina held that only minhagim, customs instituted as safeguards against halachic violations, carry binding authority. Other customs, though cherished, do not hold the same legal weight. Accordingly, immigrants could switch to the Sephardic nusach, liturgical rite. 6. Although Hasidim were halachically permitted to adopt the Arizal's nusach, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi ruled that the counterweight of communal peace in one Russian town outweighed this permission, rendering the change inadvisable. 7. If kavod habriot, shalom bayit, and darchei shalom influence halachic rulings, they must likewise guide personal conduct. Sensitivity, harmony, and respect should inform daily interactions and decision-making, ensuring that Torah values shape not only legal discourse, but also everyday life.
Thank you all for joining us for lesson 4. We look forward to seeing you next week for lesson 5, the 5th factor, how emotional and situational wisdom shape rabbinic responses.
Thank you.